Okay, real quick. I've been working as a product designer, product manager, entrepreneur for my whole career. I co-founded my first startup in 2011 here in the Bay Area. It was called Automatic. We made a little device that you plug into your car in the diagnostic port and then connects to your phone and can record your driving, diagnose engine codes, remember where you parked, and even call for help in a crash a full decade before Apple introduced that as a feature on the iPhone. And my role at Automatic was product management, product design, the usual co-founder wearing many hats. My second startup was called Hometown. It was a local news app with a really interesting take on how news can be structured incrementally. It ultimately didn't go anywhere because, well, local news is really hard. So in between companies, I've advised founders, I advise product teams, design teams. I've worked embedded on multiple projects at early stage startups, helping them to set up how product and design and engineering all work together, especially in that really amazing moment of transition from when you're just a few people in a room hacking something together to finding that thing that really resonates in the market and then needing to invest in it, raising some money, hiring people. And in this work, I come across a term that is pretty ubiquitous in our industry, and we don't really think about it too much. If you ask people like what agile really means, I think oftentimes you'll hear like we use a Kanban board or software like Jira, and we have stand-ups and we do retros and we do sprints. I think a lot of companies, a lot of teams feel like they're doing agile, but are we though? It reminds me of that story about two fish just kind of like swimming past each other, and the first fish goes to the second one and says, "Great water we're having today." And the second fish goes, "What's water?" Agile is just this idea that is so pervasive and so ubiquitous and so unquestioned that it's practically invisible to us. And I thought it would be really interesting to explore exactly what we mean by agile, what agile actually is, and whether it really helps us build great products. Okay, so I remember reading my first book that mentioned agile in the mid-late 2000s. It was something like Agile Software Development for Ruby on Rails, dating myself a little bit here. And I remember really clearly, it stuck with me, learning about how software developers can build small units of work, show it to a customer or a client, and then get feedback on it, and then do a little bit more work, and then show that progress, and back and forth and back and forth. And through this cycle of iteration, you would end up with something far better than if you had made a really big plan up front for what the final product was going to be, and then like worked for a long time to deliver it. And it turns out that the name Agile actually didn't get invented until too much before that. It turns out that in 2001, a group of 17 software luminaries got together in the mountains of Utah, which has to be like the most Silicon Valley thing you can do, to talk about software development processes. And out of that came what was called the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And it was based on 4 values. 1, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. 2, working software over comprehensive documentation. 3, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And 4, responding to change over following a plan. And then in addition to these 4 values, there were 12 software development principles. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but a few that stand out. Customer satisfaction by early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Welcome changing requirements, even in late development. Deliver working software frequently, weeks rather than months. Close daily cooperation between business people and developers. Projects are built around motivated individuals and should be trusted. Face-to-face conversation is the best form of communication. Regularly, the team reflects on how to become more effective and adjusts accordingly. As someone who loves thinking about how we do what we do, I love that people were getting together to talk about and think about and write down methods and principles for achieving what they ultimately cared about, which was making the world better with software. We could talk about how that turned out on another video, but this to me makes a ton of sense. And it makes a ton of sense, I think, especially given what the state of software development was at the time, which we've all heard the term was waterfall. And I think it's also important to remember what waterfall meant at the time. It was this linear, you figure out all of the product requirements up front. You spend a really long time planning out every little feature of a piece of software. You negotiate, if you're working with a dev shop, how much it's going to cost to build it. The dev shop works for a really long time, maybe even years, until finally you hit the release button and then like, ta-da, it's done. And I think that approach to software development actually may have made a certain amount of sense before the internet, right? Because if you were going to be printing your software onto like a CD-ROM or delivering it onto floppy disks, you better make sure that your software development cycle, which is going to be very, very long, is clearly thought out. I think that this style of product development also has its roots in the industrial age, right? If you're building a hardware product, you need to follow a pretty clear plan. And indeed, hardware development today is a lot more linear than software development. So there's something here about the nature of software as well as the nature of software delivery, which changed with the internet, that made it possible to actually work in a more incremental way. And so I love this. I think this is fantastic. This is great. We're thinking about how to deliver software more effectively. We're thinking about how to work together. We're letting go of holdovers from a different time. Fantastic. And I can see how a lot of these principles have sort of woven their way into how we work and think in startups. So these principles sound great to me. I think they make a lot of sense. It's always better to test what you're working on as soon as you can. It's great when teams are working together to figure things out and contributing each of their skills to the problem. It's great to have frequent collaboration with your customer or your user to see how they're reacting to the work that you're doing. So I think all of these things sound great in principle, but I feel like we don't really do this. Like some of the things we do, but I don't think we subscribe to Agile to the extent that we say that we do. And I'll give you a few examples. When you're working at a startup, you often don't actually want to release your software iteratively. You want to do a big feature release. Why? Because you want your customers to be impressed by your progress. You want to get written about on publications. You want to strike fear in your competitors. You want to have a big splashy release. You want to have something to motivate the team to work towards. There's lots of reasons why you might want to do a big splashy release, and working and releasing iteratively isn't always the right thing to do for the business. The second thing is that Agile is really pretty software engineer focused. It really doesn't have much to say, as far as I can tell, about how product managers and designers fit into product development. And if you're building any kind of B2B or like consumer software application, you're going to have both. And so Agile sort of assumes, in the simplest telling, that it's really just like engineers talking to customers or clients, and then back and forth and back and forth. But it doesn't take into account the very different ways of working that design and product have to do. So for example, when does a designer in Agile design the feature? When does the designer do the user research to uncover the hidden needs of our users that the feature might address? When does the product manager do the competitive analysis about what other companies are doing and how our technology might actually get ahead of that or be used to solve a critical key problem? When does the product manager meet with the engineer and the design leader to brainstorm what a possible solution could be? Agile doesn't really address this in the common understanding. Agile to me feels like a kind of one-dimensional cycle between engineers and customers, but there are far, far more people involved to make great software. And so where does their work fit in? You need to have some amount of time where the designers are working and the engineers aren't waiting around. And if the engineers aren't waiting around for the designer, what are they working on? Well, in my experience, they're probably building the last thing that the designer delivered. And while they're doing that, the designer is figuring out what the next thing the engineers should build. And now you start having a bit of like a handoff process, which is the most common thing in the world in startups. But I've heard founders oppose this on the grounds that it's waterfall. As if waterfall is bad and agile is good, but also just that it's somehow inefficient. And that confuses me because it seems really inefficient to me that you have engineers and designers working on exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. And while there are times for that, it makes sense to have time dedicated to product exploration, to design, and then to development. And the third thing that startups do all the time that doesn't seem particularly agile to me is having predictability of when software is going to be released. This is super, super important. If you're a startup and you raise some money and you're not earning a lot yet, you need to know when new features are going to launch, when those features might be able to start generating revenue, or when you're going to learn about what the market wants. Some degree of predictability is really, really important. How much time should we spend on user research? How much time should we spend on competitive analysis? How much time should we spend on figuring out the technical feasibility of a particular direction we want to go? This is a really important question. And you could say, well, as fast as possible, which is true. But you also kind of maybe want to decide not to spend more time than you have. And how do you know how much time that is? Predictability is really hard for startups, but it's really important. You need to set goals for when you're going to ship stuff, at least at a high level, so that you can plan, so that other departments like sales can know when they can start selling something, when you could start generating revenue from that new launched feature. Planning is important. And again, in its most distilled form, Agile doesn't seem to concern itself with this too much. And so we don't do pure Agile. And I know this because I've worked with startups, and one of the things I believe is true, because I'm a believer in Agile methodology, is that it's really, really hard to go as fast as you can and know how fast you're going. Or another way of putting that is, it's really hard to go as fast as you can in software development and know when you'll be done. It's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, but for software development. Like, I can know that we could not be going faster when I'm working with a team, but I don't necessarily know when we'll be done. And I could spend time to figure out when we're going to be done. I could start estimating the team's velocity. I can start estimating the exact work that needs to be completed before the end of the project. I can combine the two and get an estimated launch date. But I've just slowed us down in doing that because I had to talk to the engineering lead to break down all the stories we haven't gotten to yet. And when I try to explain this to founders that I work with, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. Of course they hate it, because they want to know when you're going to be done. And there's this belief that if we have some date, it's better than none. I just don't think that that's necessarily true. It's just that's what people want, and it's how we work. And so are we really agile? I don't think so. I think that Agile has done an enormous service to our community in helping us to think differently about how to build great software. And so I wanted to share a perspective that I've found really, really helpful for early stage teams working on software products. And that is making the distinction in your work between product discovery and product execution. Product discovery is about figuring out what the right problem is, figuring out what the right solution is to that problem. Is the problem worth solving? Is the solution feasible and valuable? Is it buildable in the time that we have? And it takes a whole team to do this. You need to do user research. You need to talk to customers. You need to look at the market. You need to explore different technologies. You need to be honest about the capabilities of your tech stack and your team. Discovery is a process of working together to figure out what we're going to build, right? And making the case that it's valuable. Execution is different. Execution is once you know that, what do you do? In that case, designers might start working on a UI spec, on a prototype. Engineers, when they've got that, might go and start breaking that into stories and putting them into Jira or wherever, and working really, really hard to deliver on that. And then you might do some user testing, right, to confirm that indeed what you've executed is what you expected to come about from your discovery work. And these two areas of work, discovery and execution, can go back and forth between each other. You might need to do a little mini discovery during execution because something came up. Or you might need to make a prototype during discovery to make sure that the concept even makes sense. And so when do you do which? Discovery obviously needs to come first, but what I've seen be really effective is teams that do just enough discovery. You can be really, really lean with your discovery. You should probably be aiming to do as little discovery as possible. And in fact, an agile mindset feels really, really appropriate to me for discovery than it does for execution, because you got everyone working together, they're brainstorming, they're exploring just enough to validate, yes, this is what we want to build. This is the solution to this very valuable problem that we've confirmed. And then execution can actually be a lot more like waterfall. You know what you need to build. You've done the work. No more than was needed to establish, yes, this is what we want to build. The designers have built the spec. The engineers can now build off of that. We know what success means. And that's just a waterfall process. And I'm sorry if that offends you, if the word waterfall, but it's fine. It's fine because the risk inherent with traditional waterfall isn't there anymore. You de-risked it in the discovery process. And so you can just put your head down and build. And it feels great. It feels really great to just put your head down and build when you know that the thing you're building is probably the right solution. And the amount of discovery that you do will depend on the project, it will depend on the team, but as little as possible is what I've seen work best. You want to do as little discovery as you need to confidently do execution. And so I'm not here to tell anyone how to build products. Y'all can figure it out. But one thing that I find really, really helpful is to be aware of the two very different modes of working that most projects require. And even if you go back and forth between them, which is fine, to at least in your head recognize, okay, we're in discovery mode right now. And that means there's going to be a lot more real-time collaboration, a lot more hashing things out. We don't need to do production quality code. We don't need to do production quality design specs. We're going to be leaning more heavily on research. Maybe engineering isn't as involved in discovery as, say, product and design are. Or maybe they're really, really involved because it's a super technical feature, but you want to put that one engineer who's the architect in charge of discovery for the project. Think about what discovery needs, what problem you're trying to solve, versus execution. We need to break the project down, we need to put our heads down and work and ship, and more time probably means more output on execution. Maybe that's the time to pair program. I don't know. But just keeping in mind that execution requires a different style of work than discovery, I've seen help teams tremendously. Just being aware of the fact that are we in discovery mode? Or are we in execution mode? Because so often what I see is teams basically just munge it all together, call it agile, and call it a day. And what that leads to is a lot of thrashing, a lot of revisiting of decisions, design not knowing if product is sure what they should build, engineer complaining that designers are changing their mind. It's pretty messy. And you can get around that when the team is really small. But the moment it gets larger, 5, 6, 7 people, I think it gets really challenging to operate that way. So I wanted to create a place where I could think about and talk about these topics that I really care about, but that don't necessarily fit into the day-to-day of my work. And so I'd love to know your thoughts on Agile. I'd love to know what product development processes work for you. What are those little things that really help your teams be effective? What have you tried and not have work? I love this stuff. So it would mean a lot to me if you'd share it in the comments. Thanks for watching. It's my first video. Be kind, like, comment, subscribe. I can't say it with a straight face. Okay, bye.